Hello, everyone. This is the November 5th to the November 13th Russian frontline report, and today we're going to start out in the area of Avdiivka. We have a number of big updates, specifically from the north, where the Russians have now entered into Stepove. Before we get into that, I want to mention that we had the first episode of the Geopop Perspective, which is the new podcast that I have that's going to be associated with this channel. I'm going to have a number of guests from different perspectives. The first guest was Sean Bell, a former RAF pilot, who's been on Sky News a good bit in the last year. We had a pretty good conversation about Ukraine and what's going on in Israel, Gaza, and I thought he had a pretty good perspective. The next guest I'm probably going to have is Scott from Calibrated. He goes by the Twitter handle of Aiden on Twitter. I know a lot of you guys probably follow him. He is going to give us his perspective on the Ukraine war. I'm hoping to talk to him at some point this week, but the idea is to get kind of different perspectives from each side on different issues concerning geopolitics. So it's not really a debate format. So I see a lot of complaints in the comments about not pushing Sean on some of his ideas, but I really just want to find out what other people have to say. So go watch that podcast. Let me know what you think of it. In the meantime, we're going to dive into this past week's battlefield updates. So in terms of the northern salient, things are slowly getting pretty bad for Ukraine in the Avdiivka direction. I'm not really seeing the same battlefield footage from the Ukrainian side that we were seeing in the weeks right after the assault started. It seemed like Russia opened up pretty hot and heavy, throwing a lot of large armored formations in, and they were getting torn up in minefields and stuff, similar to how Ukraine was faring in the Robotyne direction. Now it appears that Russia has started to focus on a more slow roll, inch by inch method that they took in the Bakhmut direction. So in this area here around the landfill, which is basically just an ash heap, everything that's been built up through the years from this steel plant right here, gives a heightened position overlooking the battlefield. And my determination was that as long as the Russians occupied this position, they would be able to slowly target Ukrainian reinforcements and Ukrainian logistics coming into the area, and that would allow the Russians to make slow gains and eventually make the situation on the flanks of Avdiivka kind of unbearable, similar to what happened in Bakhmut. And then Avdiivka at that point would slowly fall. So what we're seeing here is the Russians trying to push in this northwestern direction towards Oxcherny, which is the closest rail depot, slowly making gains, probably a little bit more than what we have marked here, but this is definitively what I could say for now. Once that is done, that will greatly increase the pressure on the Ukrainian forces in the area. Russia's also probably going to continue pushing towards Karamik, widening the salient just to protect the Russian position there. And I'm going to go ahead actually and open up the battlefield assets that show where the fortifications are in the area. So probably the most consequential thing is Russian troops have re-entered Stepove. Once they gain control over the settlement, if they do, this is going to hurt the logistical situation. As you can see here, there's a road network, which I could probably show you guys that here. The Russians, we've already seen that they have cut one of the roads entering into the steel factory, so Ukrainian reinforcements are going to have to be diverted and go around that. And then once Stepove falls into Russian hands, then you have towns like Berdichi under a great deal of stress. Russian forces also taking some ground and putting a lot of pressure on the steel factory itself. This allows actually the closing of this gap here, which, looking to the south, the Russians are actually still pushing up north from Opitny and Vadian, making marginal gains, but pretty critical in the context that we're talking about a total of 7 to 8 kilometer opening here for Ukraine to get their reinforcements in. When Russia pushes on both of these flanks and tries to develop pincers here, it means that Ukraine is going to be more and more stressed with their logistics, and that's going to hurt the furthest positions away from where the reinforcements are coming from, which brings us to this industrial zone closest to Donetsk here in the Avdiivka area. Now, this is some of the more shaky information we have. I don't know if this is certain. It hasn't been reported by some of our more reliable sources yet, but we did have reports last week of battles going on near this Donetsk filtration plant, which is some kind of water purifying or maybe sewer plant in the area. And now we have reports of Russian gains going into this industrial area here as well. So probably going to continue to see Russia push in these directions. Russia fill in some of these gaps here if they haven't already. We never really got a confirmation that this filtration plant was captured, but there is some sources that are saying that Russian gains have also been made here by around south of Kamyanka, which there's a couple pretty serious Ukrainian fortifications in the area. So I do expect, if that is true, we will see some kind of battlefield report from somebody on that situation in the coming weeks. But overall, looking at the Avdiivka situation, which let's go ahead and get rid of some of these layers here so we can see it better. It's a slow roll, but it does seem like it's going to have the same outcome of the situation in Bakhmut in the beginning of the spring. Who knows how long it's going to take? It might be sometime in the spring. If the battle keeps going, it might happen before that. I don't expect Avdiivka is going to last nearly as long as the battle for Bakhmut. So looking a little bit to the north, we'll go ahead and get rid of these assets right here. The situation around Bakhmut itself is actually getting worse for Ukraine. For the last couple weeks, Ukraine has been pushing in this area, but just really in the last week, Russia has undone a lot of the Ukrainian success. Starting here in Avdiivka, let's just go ahead and get some roads. Maybe we can get the labels in there. The Ukrainians had managed to capture some ground across the railroad, and the Russians kind of in one big foul swoop had captured back almost all of that ground near Avdiivka, forcing the Ukrainians back, as well as the ground near the railroad near Klashivka. And then you have some Russian reports actually suggesting that the Russian troops have re-entered Klashivka. Specifically, this comes from pro-Russian sources, Rybar. Specifically, we're looking down here at this bottom, I guess this is the left-hand side of your screen right here, where Rybar is showing the Russian troops have re-entered the area and taken back all of the ground that Ukraine had captured in that area. It doesn't, I haven't seen absolute confirmation of that, but more reliable sources like Syriac Maps have reported that the Russians have recaptured the rail line itself and the rail station here in Klashivka. So both Bakhmut south direction and the Avdiivka direction, a lot of territorial losses for Ukraine. I mean, not lots. When we click on these, and this might not show up on your screen, but this is about 1 square kilometer. Sorry, it's just the way I have the screen adjusted. This is, a third of a square kilometer. You're looking at a total of like 2 or 3 square kilometers in each area that have come under Russian control. Very slow moving assaults, but nonetheless, they make a dire situation much worse. So moving on to Vuhledar, this is something that we didn't get in the last update, but we do have some confirmation of now. There have been some combat actions in this area, the Russians capturing ground north of Mikelsky, a little bit further away from Vuhledar. So it seems like the method here is, originally the Russians were trying to take ground in these dachas and these houses right adjacent to the city, which probably was very unfavorable to the Russians, resulted in pretty heavy losses for them in the spring and winter of last year. Due to these high-rise positions. It's just an absolute. This city is on a hill. Not only that, but it's dense high-rises. Ukrainian defenders in this area just have a great view of all approaches. So the Russians likely pushing further to the east because of that. I would guess that the ultimate goal here is to try and push up right here where it says grocery store. This is actually a coal mine. So if the Russians can capture that coal mine, then it would place a lot of pressure on Vuhledar, which was going to have to use back roads, which for some reason aren't showing up here. But there are back roads leading in from Volenka, from this town right here. But it would cut Vuhledar from Konstantinivka and Novomihailovka. So we'll see if there's continued Russian pressure in that direction. Alternatively, the Ukrainians did take back some ground, not much, but about a quarter of a square kilometer in these dachas here on their side of the river. So real quick to talk about the situation in Robotyne. I don't have anything marked on the map here, but it does appear like Ukraine is still conducting offensive actions in this area. The utility in that I really do fail to see, but Ukraine trying to push back on Verbove. It's not really marked on here, but there are the two main Russian defensive lines, part of the same defensive line, but they're pretty significant in terms of anti-tank traps and trenches and minefields and stuff. They kind of run through these fields at an arc. All the Ukrainian advances we've seen have been kind of trying to push back onto that and also trying to widen the gap around Robotyne. All very, very small gains. In like I said, unless it's a an all-out offensive effort trying to capture one of these key towns like Tokmak, I do fail to see the purpose and the utility in those assaults. So finally, real quick to talk about the Kherson area before we get on to some actually very fascinating topics. The Russians still have not managed to push the Ukrainians out of Krinky, and on top of that, we do have a report from some pretty reliable sources that the Oleshki Novokhovka road has been cut in two places. It seems like that other place is somewhere around the town of Pishchenivka. So I don't know if the town of Pishchenivka itself has fallen into Ukrainian hands or if the road is cut somewhere in these fields here. I'll have to get some more confirmation on that. But Ukraine is pouring significant resources into this cross-river raid. Something I should have asked in my interview with Sean Bell, because he had mentioned that he had some insight on this area, and he didn't actually get the chance to elaborate on it. But I can send him some message to get kind of the pro-Ukrainian view on the purpose of all of this, because in terms of viewing it just objectively from the battlefield, I fail to see how this river crossing could be successful. But I'll try to get some insight on that. Try to get an argument for it. That way we can analyze it and see if that makes any sense or not. But that is the situation there. So the next big thing I'm going to address, and a huge story in terms of international news, but the Nordstream pipeline bombings, there's now pretty definitive evidence that they were conducted by Ukraine. In fact, we have a name, Roman Chervinsky, who is a Ukrainian, I'm guessing an SBU officer or a military intelligence officer, who coordinated the attack, and there's significant evidence that the U.S. somehow was involved, although there's straight up there's a lot of denials, and which there should be. This is the kind of thing you want to clean your hands of. But the U.S. involvement is simply training and funding provided from the CIA to the SBU to help the Ukrainian war effort. The U.S. provides military assistance and training to Ukrainian army. They do the same thing for the Ukrainian secret services. So that's the connection there. There doesn't appear to be actual evidence that, say an American CIA officer coordinated the raid. But this guy, Roman Chervinsky, allegedly, he's come out with his story, and apparently he followed the orders of the Ukrainian Supreme Commander Zaluzhny, and the other claim is that Zelensky was not involved, which, find it highly unlikely, but that's the claim. Now, the reason why this information has come out is Roman Chervinsky is actually being prosecuted inside of Ukraine. Whether it's probably corruption related, but it seems to be part of this big Ukrainian military purge. There's quite a number of Ukrainian commanders and generals that are being fired, investigated now. Since the offensive failed over the summer, there's been quite a bit of reckoning, I guess you can say, inside of Ukraine. And the government is basically cleaning house. And by doing that, they're trying to spread blame for the failures, which, it's not necessarily the fault of battlefield commanders. As I went over in my assessment of it, it doesn't seem like Ukraine ever really stood a chance at success. But Roman is being prosecuted, and it seems like he's released this story in order to cover his ass. And it is very significant because the pipeline, the Nordstream pipeline, was NATO infrastructure. It was infrastructure that was jointly owned by Germany and Russia. So it's a direct, while it is an attack from Ukraine on Russia, which they're at war with, so that's understandable. It also happened, inside the NATO territory of Denmark. This small island right here, Bornholm. That's the name of the island, Bornholm. So one of the attacks took place inside of Danish waters, and the other one it was in international waters. But it is a German-owned pipeline. So we'll see if that has any kind of effect on German funding for Ukraine, similar to how the U.S. is struggling to get Ukrainian aid package passed. The EU and Germany specifically is having trouble justifying another package. It seems like the German parliament wants more debate on sending funding to Ukraine. So we'll see if that has an effect on that, which it very well might, because certain right-wing parties inside of Germany have been gaining a lot of ground in terms of polling. So I'm sure that's going to be more fuel to the fire there. Now, it's also, in the context of that, funding not only is going to struggle because, certain revelations and these purges inside of Ukraine that kind of make everyone nervous. Not only that, but the situation in the Middle East is getting far worse. I released a video earlier today, or by the time you see this video, it would have been yesterday, because I'm going to send this off for editing. But there's actually pretty significant risk that Hezbollah out of Lebanon joins the fight against Israel, and if that happens, there's a risk that Iran gets involved in the fight, which I kind of go over in the video. At present, outside of the U.S. Air Force and Navy, which can deal out some significant damage, there's not a high enough troop concentration in the Middle East from the United States in order to handle that situation. So if that does spring up, it's going to be, all eyes on the Middle East. Full attention is going to go to the Middle East, and Ukraine is probably going to be hung out to dry, in my opinion. So I think I make a pretty good case for that in my previous video. So make sure you go watch that. The last thing that we're going to go over is the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. And I'll see if I can paste in some videos and some evidence here. But there is a number of basically catastrophic it's basically a catastrophic situation for the Russian Black Sea fleet. And I think there's two takeaways here. There's both, a big failure on the Russian side, but also a revelation. As I have pointed out in the past, a big reason for this war was the vulnerability of the Russian Black Sea fleet and Russian shipping, which I think this definitely kind of aids the case I've laid out for that, for the Russians working much harder to capture southern Ukraine than they did in any of their other offensives around the country. But there's been a number of Russian ships that have been damaged or destroyed by Ukrainian naval drones and Ukrainian missiles now, just in the last couple of weeks. Of course, you had the Moskva, which was the flagship of the fleet, is an older heavy cruiser or missile cruiser, I guess you could say, but it was still significant for the fleet in terms of air defense. The Moskva basically coordinated air defense for the entire Black Sea, and since the loss of that cruiser, we have seen Ukraine, massively step up their drone efforts and drone success from the air and the sea. And it's hard to imagine that Ukraine would be as successful in that if the Moskva were still afloat. So not only that, and several other instances of Russian ships getting damaged and some smaller Russian ships being destroyed, like patrol boats and tugboats and whatnot, in the port of Kerch. There was a new Russian missile ship, smaller than a frigate, bigger than a patrol boat, I'd say, that was in dry dock and under construction, and it was literally, it was probably weeks away from launching, because when you see pictures of it before, it looks largely completed, and that would have supplemented Russian naval capabilities within the Black Sea. Obviously, they've lost a couple ships, so launching a brand new ship with new modern technology was very important. But this ship was targeted by Ukrainian missiles, probably these what are they called? Storm Shadow missiles, and the French variant, it's just the same missile that have been sent from UK and France to Ukraine, targeted this ship and absolutely obliterated it. I mean, it's definitely damaged beyond any economical repair. It was in dry dock, so it didn't get sunk, but it's not going to be set into sea in any time soon, if ever. And on top of that, we have a naval drone attack, which appears to have taken place in the port of Sevastopol, but it could have, possibly been, you have Pretoria or even Chernomorsk on the coast here. I'm not exactly sure which. I'm sure the video will say it, and I can edit in the correction. But two Russian troop transport, or I guess basically landing craft, large landing craft, were both hit by Ukrainian naval drones. Definitely confirmed hits. Both get right up to the side of the ship, of the vessel, before the camera cuts out. The word is that one sunk immediately, and the other, the Russians tried to save it, and then it still wound up sinking. I've also heard some conflicting reports that one of them didn't sink. Either way, both are offline. So you have just really in the last 2 weeks a missile ship and two landing craft that have been destroyed, and those aren't the first two landing craft that the Black Sea Fleet has lost. So whatever is going on in the Black Sea, I'm guessing there's going to be a reckoning for Russian high command, or the admiral in charge of the area. There was a decision some months ago, I guess over last winter, to move the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol into Novorossiysk and Kerch, and operate out of these ports that were much further away. For some reason, the decision to move them back to Sevastopol, they've been targeted constantly and have lost several ships. So I don't understand why that decision was made, but it definitely appears like the wrong one, and Ukraine has certainly taken advantage of that fact and dealt some pretty serious blows to the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which can't be replenished. Russia does have other fleets. Russia actually has 4 fleets. One of the big weaknesses of Russia is all of their seas are separated. So outside of the North Sea and the Pacific Fleet, which can exchange ships pretty easily, you have the Baltic Fleet, which is essentially surrounded by NATO countries, and then you have the Black Sea Fleet, which cannot travel through the Turkish Straits or the Bosphorus, which is down here, during times of war. So they can't get new ships in, they can't get the current ships out. So until the war is over, the Black Sea Fleet is operating with what it has, which is far less than what it had at the beginning of the war. All right, guys, that is it for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Hello everyone, I'm actually editing this in after I originally created the video. This is probably the biggest news in the last 2 weeks. It just occurred when I was finished recording, but Ukrainian forces have retreated from the northern areas of Bakhmut. This is north of the lakes near Kromove, and in between the lakes, actually between Kromove and this town here, Berkivka. So a pretty sizable chunk of territory has now fallen back into Russian hands. I do not have any more information at this time about what exactly happened. It appears from the report that Syriac Maps gave, which is where this information comes from. He's typically pretty reliable. He claims that Ukraine was retreating to consolidate positions. It seems to point to the fact that Ukraine is struggling with reinforcements in the area. Perhaps maybe it's other areas of Ukraine that troops are getting drawn away from. Not exactly sure, but they pulled out, the Russians moved in, so that is probably the biggest change on the map over the last day. It's around 4 square kilometers of territory.